Welcome to another episode Out of the Blank podcast. I've been studying before you came on the show. You know what I've been studying?
What have you been studying, Robbie?
Airplane disasters.
Oh, goodness me, that's a bit morbid.
Okay, there's a great show, and I know it's a horrible topic, but it makes fun of the topic. And I don't know if this might be a reason I'm going to hell. I have no clue, but if this is probably going to be on the board of the list that when I get to the whatever. So it's called Disastrous Airways. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's on the History Channel. So that's informational. It's an interesting topic, but it tells you about all these horrible airplane accidents. And they're so fascinating to me, not on how it happened, but like how they go through this CSI type scenario where they try and figure out the cause of it. And it's like, man, you really don't realize all the working parts of a machine until they really examine it out in front of you.
Is this Air Crash Investigators? Is it that same show where they go into famous crashes and they take you through the science of why it went down, what the pilots might have done wrong?
There's 9 seasons, and I'm like, bro, this show's been on for like 10 years.
It's a good show. And there's no shortage of, unfortunately, airplane disasters. Currently in Europe, we're reeling from a state-sponsored hijacking. I don't know if this has come to your attention in the States.
State-sponsored?
Yeah, basically
like a dude robbed a plane and he was holding up like, this is the company that sponsors me, free advertisement. Is that what you mean?
No, more sinister than that, actually. There's Europe's leading budget air carrier is Ryanair, which is an Irish registered air carrier. And there was a flight taking off. I think it was going from Greece to Lithuania. And it was flying over the airspace of Belarus. And Belarus is a sort of rogue regime. People call it Europe's last dictatorship. And the Belarusians put in a fake bomb alert so that the plane would have to divert to their capital, Minsk. And the reason they did that was because they wanted to arrest the guy who is a blogger. He's an opposition activist. He's politically outspoken. They arrested him and his wife. So they called in a fake bomb scare, basically a sort of, I want to say state-sponsored, like government orchestrated hijacking of a commercial airliner. It's outrageous, basically.
Does that happen a lot?
To my knowledge, this is one of the first examples where they've deliberately and on false pretenses diverted a flight so they could go on and arrest somebody who's an opposition activist. It's outrageous, and it's I mean, there's plenty of examples of hijacking, for crooks, that kind of stuff. But for it to be orchestrated by government, very, very sinister.
There was I think about maybe a month back, there was a Denver airplane where the engine fell off and hit somebody's house. And it was like all these people didn't know they were able to safely land. Thank God nobody was hurt. But it's like, man, you really don't realize how sensitive of a thing that is. They say it's safer than driving in your car, but I don't know, man. I haven't flown in a long time. I never really liked the experiences of going there. Like we said last time you were on, a little bit of the airplane service, I would say, became a little bit shit. Just food wise and just certain necessities. Now it's even harder. Have you seen what they have to do with COVID, where they're spraying down every single seat and they have to?
I've seen it. Doesn't look great. Yeah. It doesn't look very pleasant. Actually, on the topic of airline food, will you allow me a shameless book plug?
Yeah.
My book, Food and Aviation in the 20th Century, is the paperback edition, which is a lot cheaper than the hardback. It's been brought forward for release due to popular demand. Perhaps some of that popular demand stoked by this eminent podcast.
Zeus Airlines. That's what did it.
Perhaps that was the key. But anyway, the publishers brought it forward, so I'm delighted with that. That's coming out in October in paperback. A lot more affordable. The hardback was really expensive.
Are you doing a sequel to it, or are you going to write something else?
I'm currently, I've got a book on something a little bit different. It's the food theme, but it's feeding people in wartime Britain and how people were fed during the war. But actually, do you know where I should be on the topic of food and food history research? Right now, I should be, if it wasn't for this ghastly pandemic, I would be in Philadelphia. I'd be at a place called you might have heard of it, called the Mutter Museum. It's part of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia. And I was going to do some research there, but I can't. And that's where I should be right now. But it's an amazing museum because it's basically a museum of medical history, and it's got like everything there. It's got Einstein's brain. It's got the skeletons of two of the most famous conjoined twins, Siamese twins in history. It's got various tumors cut out of very famous people, including former President Grover Cleveland. It's weird and wacky and wonderful. It's
Except
also not the
Einstein's
sort of,
brain.
it's not, I have to say as well, if anyone's going to go there, not the kind of place you go with a hangover. When I went last year, I had a hangover, and you know, when you don't really want to be looking at tumors and brains and fetuses when you're feeling a little delicate.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've got Einstein's brain now.
Is that legal?
I don't know how they acquired it. Probably paid loads of money.
Don't put organ donor on your freaking license. That's what it is.
But it's in several pieces which you can view. Yeah, it's a great place.
See, you're more interested in like a lot of these stories when it comes to older type food things. I'm more interested in the fact of why is our system so fucked up now? And I think I say that because I am a fitness guy. I've always been a fitness guy. At least I've gone and worked out every day for 9 years. But I've studied nutrition extensively, and you start to realize that the system is a little bit messed up, and it's all started from a lie. It all started from the sugar industry that were paying off giant corporations to falsify medical tests to examine that fat was bad for you. You know, that was always the thing back in the day, was you eat fat, you're going to get fat. And it wasn't even for a lot of money. It was for $50,000. That's nothing today. There are people that wipe their ass with $50,000, and you realize our whole entire system is now completely ass backwards. Things that are supposed to be healthy for you are super expensive. The whole entire public still checks their calories, and they check for carb content and they check for fat content rather than checking about the amount of processed sugars and artificial flavorings that should be focused on. Here we go. Here's a rant. So our whole entire world today, as much as advanced as it is, nutrition wise, is complete dog shit. And the reason why I say that is because all these artificial preservatives, there are people like me in their 20s that are suffering from, like myself, gastrointestinal diseases, certain other types of things that are affecting their intestines, where their body stops processing things properly at the age of like 30. And that's an issue. And that's all from a world and upon generations of just constantly learning and eating the wrong shit, because what's wrong is cheap and what's right is expensive.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You know, like you said, the 30, 40 years ago, the big public health panic was heart disease. So all the emphasis, like you say, was on, you know, cut down your fat consumption, all the rest. And that opened the door, like you say, to the sugar industry, to other processed substitute foods that actually aren't very good for you, like margarine, which everyone suddenly went for in a big way instead of butter. And yeah, the consumption, especially in Britain and America, is super processed foods. And the thing is, it links to a lot of these public health outcomes as well. So you look at the COVID crisis, look at mortality due to COVID. God, this is a depressing topic. Again, you've come up with a depressing one here. But it's linked to diet, isn't it? It's linked to, if you have diabetes, if you are overweight, if you're obese because you're eating so much processed food, then you're going to be more likely to die of COVID. And that then has public health implications. So yeah, I just wish that, there was a bit more joined up thinking by governments on addressing super processed sugary foods, sugary drinks. There are certain things, like in this country, we have big taxes on very sugary drinks, that kind of thing. I don't know, is that the right way to go? But there needs to be, an addressing of this super processed food issue, because absolutely the health outcomes are grim.
All you're going to do if you increase the tax on only sugary drinks and non-sugary drinks is you're going to have people losing more money on the fact that they're going to buy the sugary drinks, because that's what we've consumed into our brain and brainwashed it to be good. It's interesting because I've gotten heavily interested into nutrition for a while, at least probably around my third year of working out. I started figuring out, like, all right, you got to be able to eat like right too. What's the good stuff to eat is never really the stuff you want to be eating. But a few podcasts come to mind when I think of this. One, I listened to a 4-hour podcast where a scientist who was a meat eater, who was writing studies on meat and cancer cells, and then another scientist or just an observer that had studied so much about it was a vegan, and they were trying to see which diet was the best. And throughout the podcast, you're kind of seeing this vegan guy act very, very irrational. More on the aspect of not that he was vegan, it's just that's what the side he was fighting, but he would not let the other person finish talking. He would cut them off and then play like a moral ethic kind of side to it. And it's like, look, nobody's going to side with you if you're going to be this kind of abrupt person. But then he pointed out something to me around 2.5 hours into the podcast that really swayed my thoughts on everything, was the way that this scientific researcher who had all these degrees behind him was writing these certain studies. There was a study, a percentage that said, does meat cause cancer? 70 or no, it was 50 or 18% of people that ate meat saw no effect from, there was no correlation with cancer cells, and 70% were unaffected. Then it said 12% were affected. So then you look at those numbers, and the way he added it up went, he used the 18 and the 70%, and he goes, now 88% of the people either experience no or no correlation with meat causing cancer cells. And then the guy just goes, why are you adding those percentages up? And the guy goes, what? And he goes, examine what he wrote. 70% were unaffected, 18% experienced nothing. He's now adding those totals together, saying that it doesn't cause cancer. He's now swaying it because he has a bias towards meat. And then it all kind of opened up. Why are you adding those percentages? And you realize no matter if you're a vegan, no matter if you're a meat eater, I don't give a shit. Your body's different depending on who you are as a person. But we can't get the answers to what's right because the industry is so fucked, because it's all about that money. It's all about who's got to be right. It's a game now. It's all about winning and losing, just like the court systems. And I'm like, you are literally hurting your own nation, causing people to die of severe health risks, because now you're brainwashing them and they think they're eating right, but they're not. It's so ass backwards.
I think what we all should do. I mean, there's also, for the sake of the planet. Okay, I don't want to come across as a sort of vegan propagandist here. Personally, I'm a meat eater, but I'm what's I think called a flexitarian. So I tend to not eat meat. I maybe eat meat maybe 1 at most 2 days a week. So mostly I try and eat plant-based stuff. And I see in the supermarkets here, it's probably the same in the States. People are a lot more conscious now about their gut health. So there's this movement towards consuming more plant-based foods. But we come back to the issue of processed foods. I go to the supermarket now, there's all number of like plant-based substitute foods, like, that are pretending to be chicken or beef or whatever, fine, all well and good. But they themselves are actually processed. So just reverting to plant-based diet doesn't get around the bigger issue which you raised earlier, which is the processing of food and the industrial production of food. And that's where, the problem lies in terms of our consumption, really.
You ever see the movie Snowpiercer?
I have. That's great, actually. It's the train that's going around the world.
Yes. So that's what it's going to eventually be like, is that that McDonald's cheeseburger you're eating is not going to be a cloned cow. It's going to be a blob that they spray paint with a type of flavoring, and it's going to just be, you're eating shit.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, I was going to say that the actual stuff that they're feeding the people in the
cockroaches,
lower fat carriages, they find out that it's poo.
It's bugs. It's grounded up cockroaches and stuff like that fixed into this thing of Jello. They think it's like a Jello paste, and it's all cockroach meat. I'm like, eventually it's going to be like, meat's going to be a high class type thing. Regular good food is going to be a high class wealth thing. Eventually the poor are going to be eating these artificial stuffs. And that even with fruit, for instance, I remember I did a study in school, was a research study about GMOs, and you find out that a lot of the things that are organic are covered in GMOs. There's an apple at my local grocery store that's a 2.5 pound apple. It's huge as shit, but that's like bull testosterone in that. There's you got to understand that even if you're trying to eat healthy, you still got to look there, because there's all these artificial things. People look at the calorie content rather than checking what is inside of it. What is this red dye number 1? Why does this apple have all these preservatives in it? If it's an apple, it doesn't make any sense.
It's very hard. People will pay more for organic produce, but like you say, that organic apple has still been sprayed like 7, 8, 9 times at different stages of its production with different chemicals. It's incredibly hard to try and avoid, chemically processed food. It's an incredibly hard thing to do. All I would say is I think it reinforces the importance of the local, Like, we live in a world of like global production, and like, I'm just looking at my little props here. I've got an avocado, that's been flown over presumably from Peru or somewhere like that, and put in a warehouse at incredibly high temperatures to keep it, ripe and all this kind of stuff. When actually we should be probably eating local food. When I do eat meat, I'm by the way, sometimes I eat really badly. Sometimes my diet is not too good, but I try to keep on an even keel. And when I eat meat, this is the critical thing. Now, I don't know if this is a great idea or not, but I think if stuff is locally produced, often it's better because it hasn't gone through so many different hands and so many different processes. So when I do eat meat, probably 1 day a week, I go to this local butcher, and this guy, I know it's slaughtered, it's raised, free range, and slaughtered within 30-mile radius. Again, not completely perfect, but at least I know that it's fairly local, fairly well sourced, and sort of ethically slaughtered, rather than, the stuff that you're eating, that's not locally sourced, especially when it comes to meat. My goodness, and I used to work in a meat factory when I was trying to pay my way through college, and believe you me, it would turn your stomach.
So I've been saying this probably for a while now, whenever this topic gets brought up. I think that there needs to be things in place that you should have to do before you're able to consume the things that you consume. The weird part is people aren't going to care what they consume if they're not a health nut or if they're not trying to get their life into a healthier state, because of all in the aspect of time. Time is a very, very precious thing. And it's something that a lot of people don't really have, because if you look at it, how much of the food in your refrigerator can you check and understand that all of that is not expired? There are so many people that just open up the fridge, grab a meal, they fill it up, but they never check the expiration date. I know someone that I live with that is constantly throwing out food. They buy way too much. And I'm like, do you not buy what you need? Do you not know what this is? Because I want to make sure I have enough. But yeah, but it's been in the fridge for months. You think it's good? It's not good. It's going to be bad, because people can't, they don't have the time. They got to work. They got other things in their mind rather than eating. And it's crazy because I'm going to talk about the other podcast now. So Dr. Mark Gordon, he's an extreme nutritionalist and stuff like that. And he starts explaining how that you can find with the inflammatory system is linked with depression. When I offer you right now, Bryce, if I offer you a plate of 12 beautiful glazed donuts, it sounds amazing. But then after you eat them, do you feel good? Do you feel good after 12 glazed donuts?
You probably get a sugar rush initially.
Okay.
You?
You crash though.
Then you're gonna crash. Yeah.
So, but afterwards, you start to feel like shit, because they're starting to realize that all this like gluten, all this stuff that people talk about, these things that people talk about is bad for you, but don't really understand the meaning of it. It messes with your inflammatory system, which makes you want to take like a nap after a pasta dinner. Well, that causes depression. And when you're not happy with yourself, you're not happy to people around you. You take your anger out on people around you. So it's all linked into this thing where people are feeling miserable about themselves. When you get healthier, you feel better. You feel cleaner. You feel like you have more energy. You're not sweating spicy nacho Doritos out of your skin. You're sweating regular pure sweat, like water and all these other types of things that is supposed to be happening to your body. Your body starts hitting in this rhythm and this hum that works a lot better. But like I said, a system that you just said about working at a meat factory, I believe there's a certain thing you need to do. I went to a chicken factory when I was a kid. I eat chicken and I know where it comes from. I know how the process is. Do I want it to be done better? Yes. But I also know to make sure that I do not cook more than I need to consume. I have tested my body. I've done an experiment on it. I tried to figure out how much food do I actually need. I need a lot less than you think you do. I can survive off a can of tuna a day. Not everybody can do that, but your body actually needs a lot less than you put on your plate. But people see something on their plate and they consider that this is the objective, and the only way to complete the objective is when it's all gone. And that's when it becomes wasteful.
Yeah, you mentioned this before, and but I'm intrigued by this because when you say a can of tuna, do you literally mean, and I think you brought this up before, that you would just survive off eating a can of tuna then?
So what I do is I take a little bit of lettuce, I put it in a bowl, and I take 1/4 of that can of tuna and I put it onto my thing. And then 4 hours later, I'll be hungry again and I'll eat another one. I'll eat another 1/4 and do that over and over. Like I haven't eaten in 16 hours since we're recording this podcast. So it sucks that we're talking about food, but whatever. But it also comes from a factor of like, I have some digestive issues going on. So when my stomach's in pain like that, my body doesn't really care, doesn't prioritize hunger anymore. I'm able to function. I'm able to move. I think a lot of people, they sit around in their homes on their days off and take these relaxation days, and you get hungrier faster. When I have my day off, like today, I sit and I just think, like, if I'm not doing anything, if I'm not moving outside, if I'm just sleeping all day or something, you start wondering, well, I'm hungry. Are you really hungry though? Because once you start moving, you're not hungry anymore.
Presumably, if you're doing a lot of physical exercise, you're going to need to up your intake of things like carbs, because you're going to need to burn that off. I mean, you don't want to become emaciated, do you?
Yeah, but see, that's the thing though, is how much are people actually consuming and how much of that food? And then here's the bigger issue is if you start to consume less as a person, all that food that's in the grocery stores that's been built up after years upon years upon years of saying we need to double stock on this because this is our best seller starts to go to waste, and then it gets thrown out, and then it's completely wasted food. You know how many chickens die on Super Bowl Sunday?
I can imagine quite a lot.
It's like 750 million or something ridiculous like that. Because if you
Yeah.
look at how many chicken wings get served on a Sunday, a person takes down like 8 or 12 before they're done. Now, 2 of those is one chicken. Just realize all the waste of that.
But it's a very, I mean, it's to do with the Western world, isn't it? And especially, you know, in the 20th century under sort of American global leadership, this pattern of abundant consumption, of a sort of throwaway society, eating lots, buying more than you can eat, you know, big capitalist consumption, basically. That was prioritized as a thing. But now the interesting thing is you're starting to see, as countries like China, you know, with its huge population, as they become wealthier, as their middle class expands, as China starts, you know, to have a population which is developing different food tastes, they're starting to take on Western approaches to food, like, because it's very trendy now. For example, one thing in China's gone from having one of the lowest consumption rates of coffee in the world to now one of the highest. Why? Because it's trendy. All the young kids in China want to be seen with Starbucks, want to be seen, you know, drinking coffee in the Western style, like the Americans do, like the Italians do, like the Europeans and the Americans do basically. But the really interesting thing is with that, you know, they're sort of sipping on their espressos, but it's causing them huge, because they look cool, but it's also causing them huge gastrointestinal problems. They're running to the toilet after they have their shot of dark coffee because their systems can't cope with it. So again, it's to do, a lot of this comes back to, I suppose, you raised earlier, like epigenetics and different groups and what you historically eat. It's going to take them generations to adapt to that. At the moment, it's giving them all diarrhea, but at least they look cool.
That's all. That's the only thing that matters, is looking cool, especially when you're having diarrhea. You can look cool and have diarrhea, right?
Cool.
So it's interesting because I like to look at the long haul of things. The long haul is, what's the fix to be able to consume less and not waste as much food and not have this massive industrial slaughter that's going on. So, Peter, if you're listening, take notes. I think it's a factor of, you have to start worrying about the long game. And the long game is trying to transition people from using less. And that starts with implementing other factors in. You're not just going to be like the vegans. And this is where I get into an issue with them, is where they say, you got to stop eating meat. You got to stop. We have built this system for generations upon generations to run off eating meat. It's not going to just stop. It's going to be a long haul. So let's try and find ways to slowly reduce our consumption to get to a point where we don't have to use it as a priority anymore. Eventually, it's going to change. For instance, nobody talks about the issue with plastics. The fertility count in people has went from 97% in 19 think 83 or 64 or something like that, to now the percentage in 2011, last time it was checked, is now at 43%. It's almost dropped 50 something percent. It's becoming major fertility issues from our use of plastics. Plastics are in everything that we drink out of, everything that we use in our shampoo bottles. Just that little bit. They talk about don't drink a bottle of water that's been sitting in a hot car because you can get cancer. Plastics. It's now not affecting us in this lifetime, so a lot of people don't care about it, but it's going to start affecting future generations to a point where we reach an area of infertility. Singapore, for instance, they're paying people there to have more than one kid, but it's so fucking hard because their civilization or their community has been built like they're ramped up to 10 compared to maybe us or the United Kingdom that is ramped up to like 6. You know, we're at a level 6, they're at a level 10 because everything they consume is involved with that type of product because it works. It's cheap. It's valuable. Same thing with food. Meat's cheap. Meat's easy to produce because we built a system that can do that. Well, let's turn the tables. Let's not talk about cutting it off. And it's like a crackhead. You don't just say, I'm going to take your crack from you. You say, we're going to wean you off so you don't kill yourself with amount of withdrawal.
Yeah, we're going to give you some methadone and manage that. Yeah, exactly. Because you can't just turn off the tap. Like you say, civilizations and cultures are based upon consumption habits. And while I agree with the vegans that the best thing is to stop eating meat, but
I don't even eat meat. I eat fish.
But it's not even for your personal health reasons. It's also the planet. You know, think about the amount of gas that comes out of the rear end of a cow.
That's not the only factor, though. I hate that people bring that up.
Meat, but that is big. I know it's not the only thing, but it is a big thing behind red meat is methane. You know, but I do agree with you in the sense that you can't just tell people, right, stop. I mean, for instance, and this is where governments have to get the messaging right. I think, for example, and you see me here. I'm in my kitchen. I have, yeah. The thing is, governments have to get their messaging right on this stuff, right? So, for example, in the UK, the government guideline on how much fruit and veg you should consume per day is 5 a day, 5 pieces of fruit or vegetable per day. And you go to other countries in Europe, it's like, I think in France it's 7, in Germany it's 9. It's completely different. But the reason it is different is because you have different cultures of consumption. People in the UK, because it's cold and wet, basically the climate plays a big reason. Don't actually eat that much fruit and veg. So you can't suddenly tell them that you must eat 10 pieces of fruit and veg a day. You have to come to a happy medium, like say 5, like they do. But then sometimes they get it wrong. For instance, the previous chief medical officer of the UK, she came out and said, don't drink any alcohol. Any alcohol consumption is not safe, right? Now, she may well be right, but I think public health is different to personal health. You can't tell people in a society and a culture which is very much based around the consumption of alcohol, don't drink anything, because people won't listen. If you say to them, drink, a certain number of units a week, I think that's more sensible, because then you gradually manage the situation. If you tell people stop immediately, a lot of the time people just say, oh, well, it's going to kill me anyway. So what's the problem? So it has to be a sensible messaging. You can't just tell people full stop, don't do this. And people hate being told that anyway.
Well, I'll point back to an episode where I was listening with Alex Jones, for instance, and I had a brief moment after listening to this one podcast with him where I went on a climate control denialism type thing. I believe it's real, and it obviously is real, but it's the fact of the way the media also purports it. The media wants you to act as if you're at the red line and the world's about to end tomorrow. That's with anything. We saw it with the pandemic. It made it seem like it was going to be like a Thanos snap. We're about to lose half the people we ever knew. And you realize it's not like that. The thing is, they want you to act quick. And the only time people ever act on anything is when they realize they're past being able to fix themselves medically wise. You don't ever really care about going to the doctor until they find out you have some type of cancer or something that they can't fix. And you're like, oh my God, what do I got to do? I'll do everything that you want me to do. No, it's too late. We've already passed that point. The way that they get you to act is by overreacting to something so you don't underreact and take it this way. That's why a lot of people, when a storm comes, go, I've lived here 40 years. I've never seen anything like that happen before. I'm okay here. And you realize it's not going to be that bad, but they rather be over dramatic than undersell. And then you end up hurting a lot of people or something happens. Same thing with the food industry, same thing with medical stuff, same thing with anything that involves into our society. You got to understand, you got to be real with people. People are tired of being lied to, and they're going to take everything. And especially the weird part is when a weather storm comes and you overreact, people panic. But when you overreact about the food thing, people don't give a shit, because that's already in the basis of their life. So much of their life is based on the things that they do. People don't like breaking out of their routines. And if you tell them they can't have 4 snack packs a day, they're going to be fucking pissed.
But you see, the thing is that, like, for something with COVID, right? If you're a government in any country, the basically, yeah, I do classes with students online, right? And these guys are 18 to 21 years old. And through the stages of the pandemic, at certain points, some of them have been really scared, really, really scared, because they're told by the government, told by the media, like, just like stay inside, don't go out, that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not denying that public health message per se, but I said to them, I said, guys, quite frankly, you should obey the rules, yeah, but at the same time, your age and your profile, you're more likely to die of suicide than you are of COVID. Okay?
Careful. That's what Joe Rogan said, and Tucker Carlson lit him the fuck up.
Well, I mean, yeah, but that is actually true. I'm not saying that. I think
no, you're right. I agree.
Young people shouldn't get vaccinated. No, I don't agree with that. I think everyone should be vaccinated, because the point is to protect health service. It's to protect the health service of the country from collapsing, like it's done in Brazil and India. Yeah. So that's the bigger point.
It's a different argument than not taking a vaccine. It's if you're young like me, you're probably not going to be at risk of getting COVID. I had a dentist that got COVID, and he called me telling me he had COVID, and he had his hands in my mouth, and I never got it. There's risk factors at play, depending on what you eat, depending on how much sunlight you get, all these other things at play. So I understand where you're coming from.
But yeah, but at the same time, I think government should be straight with people and say, look, if you're young, there's very little chance you're actually going to die of this. But you need to obey the rules, because if you don't, the public health system is going to be overwhelmed. And I mean, then you'll literally have people dying in the street, like in India, etc. So if they actually said to people, that's why we're doing this, to protect mostly the older people and the health service from getting overwhelmed. I think people would have a bit more respect than being constantly told, this thing will kill you if you go out your front door, which really, if you're young, it won't, so I think sometimes they need to be a little bit more transparent, perhaps, in terms of the message that's coming across.
Well, they only want to tell you what they think that you should know. And sadly, what they think you should know is never really what you want to know, or never really what you should be knowing. They give you a little bit. And sometimes that little bit is not exactly the right things to be giving out to people. Like, for instance, with aliens, if they were just honest about the alien shit, like they're doing now, where they're trying to get people's attention on this alien thing, back 2 years ago, almost, we were trying to storm Area 51 to be able to figure out if aliens existed. It's like, I get it. Some people can't handle it, but you got to find an even playing field here. And people rather either they want you scared or they want you compliant. And I consider them both kind of the same thing in the way that the government runs, but I get it. It's for the health of the nation, trying to get us back on track, but you're not going to restore faith in people. You're going to create more conspiracy people when you start lying to them, and then the information comes out later. It's the biggest issue right now with all these, like now, for instance, Fauci denied all the Wuhan lab type shit. Then the headline on today's news over here was that they're now dismissing the fact that they dismissed the Wuhan lab. They're looking into it now. And I'm like, no shit. Like, come on. What the fuck are we doing?
The thing with that is, I think that pandemics are likely, and they have been likely for a long time globally, because of, and it comes back to the food system and the way that food is processed and kept, and livestock, animals are kept, and that contagion from animal to humans, which we know is the case with COVID. So I think that pandemics are going to happen. At the same time, would I rule out that this was, accidentally released from a lab? I wouldn't rule that out at all, actually. In fact, if I was to believe any of the so-called conspiracy theories about this, that would probably be the number one that I would believe is credible. I'm not saying it happened, but I think it's at least a credible idea.
Well, the interesting thing is the way that people will come across information, and then they'll be brainwashed into that side or this side instead of being open to all realms of interpretation. I think it was Socrates that said it best, was knowing nothing, or admit that you know nothing to really truly understand everything. There's a factor in understanding that is when you make a conclusion on something, you say, this is it. Nobody can convince myself, especially for me learning through the podcast, talking to so many people of different perspectives. I don't think anything is true. I think everything is open to its own interpretation. It's all about trying to understand how that person views it. And I think it was Rand Paul called Fauci out saying that you're funding the lab research. And then he denied it on national television. And then it now has come out that Fauci did supply a lot of research for studying coronaviruses and things of this sort. And I'm like, guys, if anything, my thought is they were already researching it, and then we wanted to piggyback the research so we could be like, we'll fund you a little bit of money so we can get some of that research too, because they were on to something. But like I said, even saying
the thing is, you got to be careful, Robbie, with the idea of the relativity of truth. I agree with you in a sense. You've got to be a little bit careful with that, because if you say that, and I believe you're quite right, everything is determined by context, everything is relative. The idea of a core, objective, noble truth is very elusive, and it's, as Oscar Wilde said, rarely pure and never simple, the truth. However, if you start saying that everything is relative and there is no truth at all, then you start to go down the line. Ultimately, you get to stuff like Holocaust denial. That's where you ultimately end up. If you start saying there's no truth at all, everything is relative, then you start going down, some rabbit holes start to appear. I think if you follow that line too much, as a historian, we've always got to ask ourselves, is there an objective, noble truth? And there has to be a core of truth, because otherwise, what's the point? We're just making up stories. We're just making up bullshit.
I think my point was trying to make the fact that if you slowly or tell someone that they're an idiot and dismiss them for saying that the Holocaust didn't exist, you close off the realm for them to be able to understand why it did exist. For them to be able to see facts. See, when you talk to someone from a lower standpoint, or you talk to someone from a higher point of view and consider them lower, you're not really teaching, you're not really helping educate, you're not really giving the chance for understanding to come through. And I think that's the biggest issue, is that people come off with these high notions that they're better and they know more than you. And I'm just saying, admit that you know as much as the next person, and then you open up the realm for an even playing field for conversation.
Yeah, because that alienates people. You're right, and it's anti-scientific as well, because science is a process of there's nothing is ever 100% knowable in science. It's a constant revision of theses, isn't it? So I agree with you on that one. But at the same time, do I, would I spend a lot of my time listening to someone who told me the Earth was flat?
I
Probably not.
have. I have. It's interesting. You got to
Uh,
understand their point, because it's funny, because a buddy of mine is a flat earth person. And he told me, he goes, you're the only person I can talk to about this without, like, because so many people say I'm an idiot or say this, even though there's many people in his social group that say he's right and they agree with him. I'm like, yeah, because I'm going to
well,
listen to you talk, even though I might
it's
not agree.
interesting. Well, yes, and as to why people believe that. That's interesting in itself. But am I going to agree with someone? I mean, I had a guy over here, he was doing some work on the house, and he was a flat earther. And we spent about 1 hour having a debate about what I was saying, how can you explain all this scientific fact? The earth is not flat. And he had an answer for everything. And did he convince me? Hell no. But did I respect, or well, not respect, but was he interested in how he come to that conclusion? Absolutely. So I think it's fascinating how people come to these, what I think are delusions. But yeah, I wouldn't totally dismiss people straight off. I mean, it's fascinating. He had some fascinating theories, all completely wrong. I must add, but
But that's
yeah, you're right.
important
You
that you
can't
gave
just
someone
dismiss
the
people.
time to be able to do that, because so many people just want to say no to a person and completely object them out of their life. Like a lot of people that are flat earthers will do to people that aren't flat earthers. It's like, just find the level playing field, hear each other out. You don't have to agree, but just that understanding, that compassion, that little door of open conversation and open platform makes it so much easier to be able to survive with each other.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
On the issue of conspiracies, I'm really interested to hear from obviously you're over there in the States, because we've just had, you see all this news about suddenly the Pentagon is saying UFOs are real. And why do you think, why now? Why are they admitting this stuff now?
It's called watching this hand while the other hand's doing something else. If you notice, like
Right. Okay.
during the coronavirus thing, during the pandemic, at the midst of it, they released that they're in the COVID bill, the extraterrestrial things. Nobody gave a shit about aliens at that point. They were trying to figure out how to get toilet paper and all these things. I'm like, dude, if you're gonna release shit about aliens, the best time to do so is when there's everyone's worried about something that's affecting their life right in front of them, not something that's from another thing. I've talked to plenty of people that have had alien experiences who have never met each other, and they've both described the same exact thing. And I'm like, in the same exact way, even though a lot of these famous ones that you,
Up the arse,
no,
the
no, no,
cattle
no.
probe. No.
It's more like you see like three lights in the sky in the shape of like a triangle, like in it, like you see one light, three light, like in the corners of a triangle. And then when they
Yeah.
would move, the lights wouldn't move, but they would see a dimension, like how you're looking at my hand. They would start seeing this thing like they had conquered two-dimensional or something like that. And I'm like, all these flying UFOs and all the stuff that they're releasing now, why the hell wouldn't you get your mind off the fact that this fucking world, the government is so political corruption? It's in the eye of everything right now. Social media has exposed it more than it's ever been exposed before. The fact that people are worried about conspiracies with vaccines and all this type of stuff. Release the alien shit, because then people are more than willing to get a shot in their arm knowing that there's a higher being out there that's watching over them. It's all a fear aspect. It's all trying to
Well,
get
that's the
people
thing.
distracted.
Yeah, again, historically, like the big sort of, the 1950s, the Red Scare, that's the sort of typical, Area 51, Roswell. That's when you think of, that's clearly where UFOs are mingled with a state-sponsored project in fear, essentially. However, like now, are people sort of excited about the prospect of higher beings, or are they actually scared about the little green men coming from their flying saucers? Are people, how have people reacted over there? Are they scared or excited? I can't sort of gauge it.
I think more people are worried about the coronavirus. I don't think anybody really cares about the whole alien things unless you've been spouting off alien stuff for a long time. Now you're like, why is nobody giving a shit? It's like, because there's a fucking pandemic we're dealing with.
I
But
told you so. I told you.
do you think aliens exist, or do you think it's all like a ploy?
I don't think that it is unbelievable or incredible that there are other forms of existence. Absolutely not. I wouldn't. I wouldn't write it off at all. I remember having, when I was in university, like maybe 2021, and this quite eminent professor who was real crazy, real. I shouldn't use that terminology. He was very eccentric English guy, very very clever to the extent where he'd been arrested for reading whilst driving. This guy, but he was a professor of history, so real, eccentric guy. And I remember him saying in one of our seminars, he just went off on this mad tangent, as very intelligent people do, about how he firmly believed aliens existed. At the time, I was like, what? What's this guy talking about? But if you stop to think about it, it's not beyond the realms of belief whatsoever, is it? That other life forms are out there.
I think when you start to think that you're the only beings alive in this universe and don't look at it from a bigger point of view. But like I said, that gets hard with flat earth people because they don't really understand the full scope of this earth, I would say. So then when you start talking about aliens on another planet, you go, I don't know. I don't even think I see. Then that leads into the moon landing, and I'm not diving down that rabbit hole because I think we landed there, but I don't think we landed there when we said we landed there. But I don't know.
You don't think it was done in a Hollywood studio, directed by what was his name? Isn't this the big myth that it was directed by who did The Shining and all that stuff? What was his name?
I know who you're talking about.
Kubrick, apparently.
Yeah, I don't believe
Stanley Kubrick was
I don't
the
know.
director.
I don't believe all those details, but I believe that it was like the video that was released. I believe that was filmed. But I think it was all of a ploy of propaganda on an aspect of we were really hurting at that moment during the war. It seemed like we were going to lose and the nation needed something to believe in the space race. This idea that like if we show these people that we land here, it not only shows our enemies that we can do something faster than they can, but it also shows the people that you can have hope in us. We're going to do amazing things. And then we ended up going up there later, just not when we said. But I don't know, because Buzz Aldrin has said a lot of shit. And everything Buzz Aldrin has said has came fucking true. He said there was water.
What did he say? He said there was water on the moon.
He said there's water on the moon and there's an obelisk on Mars, and we found them both. And I'm like, motherfucker was saying it for 70 something years. You can't just dismiss them now.
There's a great video. Somebody showed this to me the other day. It's about 10 years old, but it's actually, did he die, Buzz Aldrin, recently? Or is he still alive? I can't remember. Anyway,
still alive.
There's a video of him about 10 years. No, it was Michael Collins who died recently, the guy who stayed in the spacecraft while the other lads were out there. But Buzz Aldrin, there's a great video of him. It's about 10 years old, and there's a guy who confronts him in the street, tries to like doorstep him in the way that is normalized these days, because everyone's got a phone now, everyone's a journalist in inverted commas. And this guy's saying the moon landing was a hoax, and you know it's a hoax, and your life is built in the tissue of lies. And Buzz Aldrin just turned around and smacked him in the face and just floored the guy. And it was quite amusing to see. It was a sort of direct response to this sort of, highly charged sort of conspiratorial stuff. It's, I mean, when you think about that, you think about the possibilities of exploration, Mars. I mean, fascinating stuff.
I just think that a lot of it is for initial good intent. But then when you start going down this thing that, if you would have told me 50, or if you would have told people 50 years ago, I remember talking to my grandfather about this. I was like, Bryce, do you know what Bohemian Grove is?
Bohemian what? Sorry.
Bohemian Grove.
No.
God damn it.
My example
just ruined my whole fucking setup. So the way I'm going to explain this is going to sound nuts to you. Just like, all right, so imagine you're my grandfather and I'm telling you this. So picture yourself a 70-year-old man. Yeah. And you fought for your country. You've done all these things. And I tell you that there's a giant statue of an owl named Moloch and a bunch of heads of state, people in Congress that are praying in front of this thing in front of a fire. You would go, that sounds fucking insane.
Yeah.
Until that information came out last year. And there was videos of these giant heads of state, people that run our government in the States, that were praying in front of this giant statue of an owl, burning a wood effigy in front of a statue named Moloch. Sounds fucking nuts, but it's real shit that actually happened. Jeffrey Epstein?
The pedophile, yes.
Okay, all that information and documentaries come out, all that crazy shit. He was there's pictures of Bill Clinton in like extravagant, sexy, like naked wear, paintings of it.
But like this stuff, I believe that the world is effectively run by a fairly small cabal of the ultra wealthy
Illuminati.
who are interested in their own greed and just becoming more greedy and pulling up the drawbridge to everyone else. Absolutely, I believe that. Do I believe that there's some kind that they represent some kind of elite globalist cult that is manipulating everything from the weather to pandemics? No.
No,
Do I
I don't
believe
believe
that?
the weather and pandemic thing, but I believe
Do,
the like the
do I believe that there are a bunch of like sexually, amongst the globally rich, there are sexually depraved clubs basically for very rich men? Absolutely, which is what Epstein was, and obviously like Prince Andrew from the royal family here has been implicated in that, and yeah, I mean they are depraved, ultra rich men. Are they orchestrating world governance? I don't know. A friend of mine the other day was telling me all about Bill Gates and the Epstein connection, and again, complete, do very wealthy men act in very bad ways and try to manipulate people for their own greed and self-interest? Absolutely believe that. But then he was sort of implying that Epstein and Bill Gates were sort of running some sort of covert world government.
what I do with any of these conspiracy things is I draw a line at some of the information they say. It's like with Alex Jones. When I listen to him, I take everything he says, I stop, pause it, look it up. It's true. But then he goes off on like something like this. This was all a scam and all this type of stuff. Aliens are real. And you're like, all right, that stuff came true. And then he says something like, and the earth is flat. And you're like, that's where you got to cut them off. That's where you got to draw the line and say, that's the bullshit, because they go a little bit too far with it. Some of it, there's a core and riddled with a little bit of truth, and there's a little bit of bullshit on top of it.
Well,
and that's
absolutely. This is the thing, but there's a core of truth there. It's like the guy who came over to lay my carpet, and one of his theories, along with the earth was flat, is that he was talking about, again, which is quite true, like how there is like a wealthy elite who basically run the world effectively. I don't deny that that's true, but then he starts going on about how there's a conspiracy of trans people, secret trans people. He names a load of them, people who are secretly trans, everyone from Michelle Obama, according to him, to other famous actors and actors and actresses. And there was a trans conspiracy trying to take over the world. Now, like, how did we get from something that's quite credible to this idea that there's a trans cult that are running the world? It's the leaps that I don't quite understand. Where's the logic? Where's the logic in between? Our people, I think what it is like, you look at history, right? Change is happening very rapidly in the era in which we live. You think of technological change, like your iPhone, unimaginable change is happening in the space of 20, 30 years. Stuff like trans rights, things like this. Things happen, like you were saying earlier, very quickly and very rapidly. And people don't like that. People like continuity and safety. They don't like being confronted with huge change in their life. And I think the way some people process that is to turn it into that this must be a conspiracy. This must be, a group of people manipulating all of us.
It's all a lie, Bryce. You're not in front of me right now talking to me. You got to Google Bohemian Grove when we get done with this, because you'll be like, holy
Bohemian
shit.
Grove. I've heard of Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. I've never heard of Bohemian
It's called
Grove.
Bohemian Grove, because like people like my point was, if I would have told you that 50 years ago, like I said it to my grandfather, he would have thought I was batshit nuts. And then now it's came out that it's true. And it's very, very hard right now because with all this exposure on the government, like we had a Wyoming lawmaker that's running. And he came out and said when he was 18 years old, he impregnated a 14-year-old girl. And that sounds horrible, but he was open about it. And his excuse to it was, I know you're going to try and find it against me anyway, so I'm just going to bring it right out front so you got nothing against me. That's where it's at. The exposure with social media, the exposure with how much information is easily accessible onto your phone. If you do something bad and some dude admits to it openly before it all like gets in front of the train thing, should you respect him more for that? Because it's a factor of it's going to come out, they're going to find it, and when you hide it, it looks even worse.
Well, yeah, that's that. I've just looked up Bohemian Grove, and there's several camps. This is amazing. Great names as well.
Apparently, Alex Jones went there, and then he also ran into Danny Glover, the guy from the Lethal Weapon movies, was there too. Apparently, it's like all these famous Congress and government people that invite like anybody they want. They'll invite Brad Pitt just to have Brad Pitt there. But it's.
I don't think that's beyond. That's totally credible. I mean, wealthy men have been doing that. It's basically a gentleman's club, isn't it? It's all male.
But it's our
people have been
Congress.
Doing this for years.
It's our lawmakers. It's the people that are fucking running our government that's doing it, not even rich people. That's what's weird.
Huge issues of potential conflict of interest and corruption and all the rest. Absolutely, but that's always been the way, hasn't it? You know, you in Victorian
I hate your
London, that
answer.
you had gentlemen's clubs.
I
Gentlemen's clubs
told
will
you a
always
minute
exist.
ago, and for the audio only listeners, he looked at me like I was fucking insane. And now he's like, well, you know what? It happens. I'm like, bullshit. Fucking pat me on the back and tell me, oh my God, I never knew.
I didn't get to the bit where they were worshipping a massive owl, but like, yeah, I can.
There's a giant owl statue. It's this stone statue, like, I mean, the size of a building that they're by, and they're burning. See, the issue was at the time where this is around when QAnon started. The issue was that they had a small little wood effigy, like a size of a small child, and they were burning it. And then people raised the question, how long was that wood, and what was it before it was wood? You got to think of the old ritual ways of things that had to be a person at one point that they would do back in like the 1800s or something like that. Before even America was a thing, there was probably this type of tradition, just like Freemasonry is really, really old. You know, there's an old way with it. So that's what people were raising the point, where it led to this QAnon thing, where it started realizing that they're trying to find pedophiles on the internet. Some of them probably did, but a lot of it was like, now you're thinking everyone's a pedophile on the internet, which isn't true. A lot of the times it's just bots, but it's people acting, because the worst thing, the reason Alex Jones was talking about when he talked about Bohemian Grove, was the worst thing you can do. So like in our government system, they want to try and have a hold over you. And the easiest way to have a hold over you is by doing something so severe that if it ever came out, it would ruin your career and you would look like the worst person in the world. And that would be messing around with kids. So that's how they get you. It's just like a fraternity. You got to do these steps to be able to be part of the group.
Okay, so they're always, so you can never leave because they can always blackmail you.
Yeah,
that's part of the deal. That's
so,
quite interesting.
Well, that's what the Epstein thing is. A lot of the time they talked about the people that would go to Epstein Island. A lot of these people that, you know, they're talking about it, they're like, I didn't know they were that age. They looked like they were older. And it's like, that's how they get you. When they tell you, did you know she was 15? Did you know she was 16? No, because she looked 30. Like, she looked so worn and so like been through so much shit she's seasoned. She looked older. And that's
Well,
how
I
they
think
got all these people.
that's interesting. That's used as blackmail. What I find quite disturbing these days is, I mean, there's a lot talked about cancel culture, and I don't completely buy into it, because
It exists.
sometimes, well, it does.
I own a fucking show. It exists.
It does, for sure. But there's also some people which hide behind it to actually, you know, make pretty disgusting statements. However, it's I think sometimes a bit disturbing that because the world of social media, you know, anyone can drag up a tweet that you drunkenly composed when you were 18 years old and use it to make you lose your job. It actually happened to a friend, well, guy I went to university with, who I'm not into gaming and stuff, but this guy, it was he's a gaming, he's an English guy, but he's in the States at the moment. He's just been cancelled because of supposedly sexist comments he's made while gaming, while streaming. His name is Jeff Leach, and he was the voice actor for Call of Duty for some character. And that, again,
they looked through some, because he's also a comedian as well too. I heard about him.
Yeah, I went to university with this guy, so I was kind of like, a friend of mine sent me this and said, "Oh, have you seen that? Like, Jeff's just been cancelled." I looked it up. I was like, "Wow." First of all, number one, I didn't realize he was relatively famous over there.
Yeah, he does the multiplayer voice.
Yeah, because his comedy career like fell on its arse over here. So it's fair play to him. He's carved a career of that. And I didn't actually realize you could make so much money out of being sponsored for playing computer games, essentially. So fair play to him. I haven't spoken to the guy in years. We actually used to be fairly close at university, but
it's Call of Duty, bro. That's a big fucking game.
I have heard of it. I'm just not a gamer, you know. But I see what's happened to him now, and I don't quite know what to think because I don't know enough about the context. But I see that now suddenly he's lost all his sponsorship, and and again, I haven't really looked into it, so I'm speaking from a position of ignorance. But
in his stand-up joke, it was like, if you talked about something like, if you cracked a joke about like a woman or something, if you crack like, well, this is a man's job. It's something on that context where now they look at that like that's not okay now. It didn't translate over. You know, people couldn't take see what happens is if you say something in a podcast episode, I might say it in a joking manner and you don't understand it's a joke. But then if someone sees the transcript for this, it comes off pretty fucking bad.
Sure. I suppose that's the jeopardy though. If you are, again, I don't know enough about this stuff, but presumably his income comes from his sponsorships, and brands will always want to protect brand value. They don't want anything to become damaging to that.
It's why in the movie with what's his name? The new movie on Netflix. I think it's called Living Dead or something like that. They completely CGI'd Crystalia out of the whole entire movie and added somebody else.
Who did they CGI out?
Zack Snyder, the guy who made Justice League, made another movie on Netflix, a zombie movie, but they CGI'd Crystalia, that comedian guy. They CGI'd him out because of
Did
all
he
his.
make some bad remarks or something?
He was flirting with underage girls on the internet.
Well, that's the thing. But I just read it on Twitter though that Kevin Spacey has been rehired for a film role. So maybe
Yeah.
there's a way back after. Again, a lot of these people, I'm not going to, defending Kevin Spacey is certainly not the hill I'm going to die on. Pretty despicable guy, but it's like it's this question about art and life, really, isn't it? I mean, if we were to, and again, I'm not going to ever defend people who are pedophiles or whatever, but if we were to expunge and totally censor and just destroy any art which was created by an asshole, then believe me, there would be very little art and culture left, because you look into many of your great heroes, literary, musical, etc., back in the past. I mean, nobody has 100% clean living, and a lot of these guys were tortured creative geniuses who did some very dark things, and you can't cancel everything, otherwise you're going to be left with nothing.
Yeah. It's weird, the woke narrative or whatever that is that's going around. It's designed to be this great thing, but then the way that people take it, they end up destroying things with wokeness, things that like ruining a person's career based on an assumption that ends up not being true. There's a lot of things where people make allegations and say things without even knowing evidence to it, all because they read a headline or a thing. They had Justin Bieber, he has dreads now, and people were giving him shit saying he was culturally appropriating dreads, and they were calling him a racist and all these things. And even Jaden Smith, Will Smith's son, commented, he was like, nice dreads, man, like they're good dreads. Dreads aren't culturally appropriating a certain culture. Gladiators had dreads because it's a sign of dirty hair. That's all it was back in the day, was that the hair was so long they would curl it like that. But people don't care. They just see something and they want to run off and become.
Well,
It's
absolutely.
shipping at a god, basically.
Well, I'm not against like the so-called like wokeness, because if someone's coming from a position of, you're informed about your history, you're informed about historical oppression, and you're trying to make the world a better place, if that's woke, then fair play to you.
That's not woke.
Where it becomes problematic is if it becomes pedantic or reductive or decontextualized. That's the issue, isn't it? If something is completely taken out of context.
Woke is not someone that understands what's going on. Woke is not something that a historian is commenting and saying this is this. Woke is the fact that someone reads a headline article written by, like we talked about before, everybody's a fucking journalist now if you own a blog, written by some person that might hate somebody, and decide that, oh, you're telling me Bryce Evans is racist? You're not. But somebody writes an article like that that's slandering you just because you went to school with them and you fucking hate them, or they don't like you. You guys had a feud or something. They read that and that's their information now, and they consider that fact, even though it's 100% not true. But someone takes that and runs with it, and that's what wokeness is people that feel like they're doing something that's actually in a good cause, in a good moral, but they start reading things and they start acting upon the first headline rather than actually reading the thing. I read an article yesterday about it said it was from an Instagram comment. It was like most influencers are actually bots. And then you're like, okay, so that now it's programmed into your brain that all Instagram influencers are bots. So now it became this conspiracy that Kevin Hart is a bot. And you're like, hold on a fucking second. The man has comedy specials. What are we doing?
Well, again, we come back to this issue of truth and relativity, and it's very hard to parse, this world in which we live in. It's very hard to parse apart the truth from, untruth. And,
Helen Keller's not real. That was on Twitter like a month ago.
I'm afraid I don't even know who Helen Keller is.
Oh my God,
that might be
call
true.
Yourself a historian.
Who's she?
You got to just Google her.
Helen Keller. Okay, hang on.
I can't explain that one to you. She's a big figure. I'm surprised you don't know who that one is. That's like saying, who's Hercules? It's like, what?
Keller. Well, Bohemian Grove. I'm going to go down that rabbit hole later on.
It's a good one to go down, but you got to be careful.
Helen Keller was an American disability rights activist. Oh, what an inspiring woman.
Yeah, she was blind and deaf and all these things. South Park made a really funny episode about her. It's horrible, but it's funny.
She sounds like a very admirable woman. But what,
Yeah.
people are saying she's not real?
Yeah,
That
they
she
thought
doesn't
that,
exist?
which if you look in their perspective, you can see, like, imagine if I told you a story about a woman that accomplished so much, who was completely blind, deaf, and had all these things wrong with her, and she
Mm.
accomplished so much, then you don't really have an excuse to be a piece of shit. You know what I mean? But sadly, she was real. But people said people said Helen Keller was racist because there was a picture of her and Charlie Chaplin together, and Charlie Chaplin had the Hitler mustache. So, like, people
But
are
that
like,
was from the film The Great Dictator, wasn't it?
that's
He
the
plays
thing,
Hitler,
is
doesn't he? Yeah.
everyone thought that was started running off like that was Hitler. And I'm like, that's Charlie Chaplin. You fucking spend more than 2 minutes in an article, please.
Problem is, I mean, if you use that term woke to mean people who are permanently offended, then I agree that it's wrong. But
That's woke.
sometimes in the so-called crusade for, some people use the crusade for free speech to just be demeaning and belittling and bigoted to people. I'm not saying that stuff should be censored or certain stuff should be off limit, but basically, if you're doing comedy, for example, I think the basic rule is that unless you're a complete asshole, you should try and punch up. That's the basic rule, isn't it? You shouldn't really be belittling people who are below you in a way. And if you're using the cloak of free speech in order to punch down rather than up, sometimes that's a bit problematic, because that is basically, like you said, just being an asshole, isn't it?
Yeah, but in comedy, punches down sometimes too.
Yeah, sure, but
Sam Kinison had the best joke about starving people in Africa.
yeah, but sometimes it's just like,
He
guys,
said, you complain about starving. He goes, you see where you fucking live? You see this? It's sand. You know it's going to be here in 100 years? Fucking sand. Get your shit and get out. Like, that was the whole joke. You got to understand is that people take things out of context. Woke started as this amazing thing that was going to change a lot of important things that needed to be changed.
But woke initially meant that you were someone who was woke alert, alert to
yes,
the reality of oppression and the
that's what it used
historical
to be.
foundations thereof.
It's not that anymore. It's now this thing of anytime you see something, you run with it and you consider that this person is a racist, this person is this. You make an assumption that isn't true. Nobody wants to sort and find the facts anymore. It's called running with the first headline. Everything that initially starts that ends up turning bad. It's like the Batman quote. You either die as yourself as the hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. That's the thing, is that it ends up diluting into this thing where now people are just going to point things without any information, anything like that. It happens with everything. Everything dilutes.
Would you like me to make a woke point about Batman? Batman should be cancelled because he's a guy, right, who hangs around with an underage boy, Robin.
No, he hangs around with his butler.
He makes him dress up in tights, and
he dresses up in tights. Maybe he's a schizophrenic.
He makes his butler wear a butler's uniform 24/7. That's weird enough in itself.
You're telling me none of the people in royalty over there wear these fancy royalty outfits?
All I'm asking is, did Batman ever visit Epstein Island? I don't.
That's a conspiracy theory. Someone's going to clip right to the end of this and hear that, and they're going to run with it. I heard from a historian that Batman was on Epstein Island. I don't know, man. The world's crazy. I just don't want people pointing pitchforks and all these things at each other. We shouldn't be fighting each other. We should be trying to find a way to build up together. It's going to be a better world if we can be able to figure that out. But the idea of a utopia in my mind is impossible. There's always going to need to be conflict, but trying to find a bigger enemy. And that's why I like the alien thing. People can get behind that another extraterrestrial being is down here to hurt them, the people will come together, just like with the pandemic. They will team up together to be able to help each other to get over this crazy thing that we cannot see, and it's very hard for us to fight.
I, for one, welcome our new alien overlords. I think they might do a much better job than current heads of state.
The blinking sideways, the reptilians, the blinking sideways. I don't think it's like that, but I mean, that'd be cool. I wish I could blink sideways.
Oh, the lizard people.
Yeah, lizard, like
yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah, that was another one that the guy told me about, actually.
Puppies.
Yeah. It's fascinating what some people
Happy to have you on the show again, Bryce.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Robbie. Great talking to you as ever.
Where can people find your book again?
Food and Aviation in the 20th Century, coming out in October on paperback, a lot more affordable. All good stockists online. Give it a Google or whatever search engine you use. And
wait, coming out this October?
It's already out, but it's hardback, so it's expensive because they want university libraries to buy it. But this October, the paperback's coming out, and it's going to be cheap.
When
So the common man, can read about airline food finally.
when it comes closer to that day, we should have you on to read an excerpt from your book.
I would, any opportunity, like I say, I'm always available for shameless self-promotion anytime, Robbie.
As long as we can talk about conspiracies for a
Oh,
little bit.
always. And how about Batman? Yeah, just all I'm saying is like examine the evidence, hanging around with a little boy, giving sort of rechristening him, making him hang out in a cave, wear tights.
I'd rather say Tom Holland was involved in the Epstein thing rather than.
Who knows? Actually, do you know who's Tom Holland?
Do you really
I
not
don't
know
know
who
who any of
Tom
these
Holland
people
is?
are. Can I look him up?
Yeah.
Or do you want to wrap this
Actually,
up?
go to my
Hang on.
Twitter. Go to my Twitter real quick.
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to your Twitter. Out of the blank. Yeah.
Okay, go now. Scroll down until you see a photo of me and Tom Holland.
There's a picture of an egg. You're talking about a bacon egg sandwich.
Well, that's my tweet about eggs.
Tom Holland. Oh, that guy. That actor. He's an actor. Yeah. My goodness, you're him. Wow.
Someone
Wow.
called me the working man's Tom Holland, which means I shuck bales of hay into a truck.
I like that. You're the blue collar Tom Holland. You're the Springsteen version of Tom Holland. Who is he's like a Hollywood actor, isn't he? Tom Holland.
Yeah, he's from the UK too.
Is he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know this.
He
The
plays
faces-
Spider-Man in the new stuff.
That's right. Yeah, of course I've seen him before. Yeah, you do resemble him, or he resembles you, I should say.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to end on that one. This has been a great podcast, Bryce. We're going to make sure we link the books in the description and people can see the paperback when it comes out in October. Then we're going to have you on to read an excerpt from your book while you also read me a bedtime story as well, too. 3 Little Pigs.
I would love to, on my rocking chair by a roaring fire.